facilities and all that kind of stuff. To me, that's technicalities, but I think the vision of where this city's going and where you have the opportunity to go is really exciting.
I understand that you served as the bicycle program coordinator for Stanford University.
Right.
Are there any lessons from Stanford that you think we could maybe apply here in Detroit or to Wayne State University, since that's where we are right now?
Yeah, what happened at Stanford and what really changes everything is it comes down to parking pricing. If it's free to park and it's easy to park, that's what people are going to do. They're going to drive their car and they're going to park. Once you look at, and that's what they did at Stanford, they looked it over. It's a much more complicated, detailed situation, but the bottom line came down to is they priced people out. And they incentivized people and said, they pay employees at something like $50, okay, this is probably an exaggeration, something like $50 every 3 months to not drive, to walk, to bike, to use the transit, all this stuff. They've had some money to do that, but once you start pricing parking, once you start looking at what are we giving away for free versus what are we incentivizing, it completely changes everything. The easier and cheaper parking is, the more people are driving parking. It's just pure economics. And that space costs money, and it's not filtered into our way of thinking, but every parking place costs a lot of money, and we don't talk about that. That's like, well, that's expected. That is a cost that the city has to pay, and the maintenance on parking lots that's in front of it. And if you build something else that maybe costs the same amount, you can maybe have a really beautiful bike path that a lot of people use versus that expensive parking lot.
And I understand you also, in Chicago, you served with something called the Active Transportation Alliance. Tell us about that.
Active Transportation Alliance is through the Chicagoland Bike Federation, and it's a fairly large advocacy group that promotes biking, walking, and public transit. About 3 years ago, we changed our name from Chicago Bike Federation to incorporate the changing world of people being interested in public transit and walking. That organization has done a lot of really great work in the last year or two, and what I was going to say I'm the most proud of from working there is I work in the suburbs. A lot of people, I'm going to try not to stereotype here, but a lot of people really like to work only in cities, and they like to see the city, and the city's so cool, and that the place they live is so cool, and the place they work is so cool. And meanwhile, you get a little further out, and there's very nice people who are also kind of cool, who need to be able to ride their bike into the core and so forth. And I was very excited about a lot of the suburban work we did to get the suburban communities thinking more about active transportation. And we had a city manager in this community called Hope Forest. He was so visionary. He kept saying, nobody's buying any housing now, but in 20 years, we're going to be the go-to city for the young families who want a place where their kid can walk to school and they can send their kid over to Starbucks, and they can do that. And they don't have to worry about crossing one of these crazy arterials that's 8 lanes, and nobody even looks for bicyclists. So that's the kind of work I'm most proud of, is working not just in the city core. And I know we're all, maybe everybody here loves Detroit, doesn't think outside of it. You have to get there sometimes, right? You have to sometimes ride your bike out from the core, and don't you want to be able to do that? And not be stuck always having to, once you get without your 3 miles, once you get outside of Midtown, all of a sudden you can't walk anymore.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next panelist is somebody that, for those of you in the audience that are bikers, you may have actually patronized her place. I actually got my spring bike tune up there just a couple weekends or so ago. That's Kelli Kavanaugh from the Wheelhouse.
Hello. So I am one of the co-owners of Wheelhouse Detroit. I've also been organized with the participating in raising funds for the Corktown Upside Green Link for probably about 10 years now, and the Tour Detroit for about 6. So when questions come, I'm I think that's why Claire asked me for those reasons. But I was going to share a couple brief anecdotes. And I wanted to start by taking issue with Mayor Bean's statement about the city of Detroit being built for the automobile, because it wasn't. Detroit's street grid system overlaid with the spokes is actually an amazing system for biking, and of course had such a great transit system prior to it being removed. I would say that our freeway system was built for the automobile in a really disastrous fashion. which leads me to my first anecdote. And it relates to the theme of change that we've been hearing a lot about. My education background is actually in civil engineering, and I went to the University of Detroit. And in my transportation engineering class, our first day, the typical professor asks you some discussion questions, and the question was, name some modes of transportation. So of course, automobile came up, train came up, plane came up, boat came up, and I was like, total hippie girl. And I said, walking and biking, and everyone just sort of looked at me. Like it was just a crazy thing to say, and in fact, it was left off of the summary of the class. That was not acceptable to discuss in civil engineering class. Well, fast forward 15 years from now, and the first firm I ever worked for, Gibbles Webster Engineering, is the firm that did the non-motorized plan for the city of Detroit. And things have come a long way, just in the realm of engineering, and you can see that shift also in the city, in the state government. MDOT wouldn't look at bikes as a form of transportation, and I can only speak to 15 years ago because engineers were being educated the same way that I was, that wasn't a valid mode of transportation. So that leads me to the second point of change, that bikes as transportation versus bikes as recreation and exercise. And I think that, you had this mountain bike craze, you had the road bike craze prior to that, and people got out of looking at bikes as a valid form of transportation, unless you had like 3 DUIs and it's all you were allowed to do around. It's true though, it's stereotyped as a form of transportation for people who have no other alternative, whether it's economic or legal. And I think that's starting to change. And I think the bike industry is seeing that change a lot with the type of bikes that people are buying. Rather than looking at, mountain bikes with knobby tires or, carbon frame racers that you have to spend a ton of money on and have a ton of special equipment, and you look kind of silly when you stop at the store. You can get a bike that's, single speed or 3 speeds or 7 speeds and ride really comfortably around a city like Detroit. You throw a rack on, you throw a basket on, a bell on, a mirror, and you start realizing that transportation via bike isn't just fun, it isn't just exercise, it is both of those things, but it's also a very practical mode of transportation, especially when you're talking about an urban core. You can get anywhere within the greater Toronto area within 15 minutes on a bike, and you never have to worry about parking. You just have to lock your bike up well. And it just, maybe that's engineering me, it just actually makes sense to look at cycling as a mode of transportation. And I hope that as we go forward and build a lot of these bike infrastructure projects, which are amazing, that the distinction between bikes as transportation and recreation is kept on the table. Just because I know when I'm going from Eastern Market down to my bike shop, if I have plenty of time, I love to take the DeQuinter cut, it's awesome. But if I don't, I'm definitely going down Brevard, there's no question about it. And that's two different ways of looking at cycling, as recreational, fun, method of getting around versus an actual form of transportation that you need to get from point A to point B in the quickest, safest manner possible. And those are two different kinds of infrastructure. So those are, I know it was kind of random, but that's what I got.
Just a couple questions before we open it up for audience Q&A. From your perspective, what do you think the city of Detroit needs to do to be more bike friendly?
Well, I think what Todd talked about is the road diets. I mean, that's just like the easiest, simplest, cheapest. Like I would just put every road on Weight Watchers right now.
Okay, and another question is, what kind of feedback are you getting from your customers on that score? What do they tell you?
Well, it's interesting. I think there is a perception, and it's a valid one, that Wheelhouse is, a bike rental shop. But less than 20% of our business is rental, which shows you that the vast majority of our business is coming from residents of the city of Detroit that are looking for retail and are looking for service on their bikes. And what we're hearing a lot of is, like, for example, the #1 service job that we do is people come in with their 1990s hybrid with the knobby tires, and they say, man, do I need a new bike? This thing's really slow. And, the first thing you can do is put smoother tires on, and just bam, you got a whole new ride, basically. So it's a lot of people coming in that have used their bikes as recreation or exercise and are now looking to use it